about the valuation aspects. Okay, so that's it from my side on the valuation, and I hope that you've got the broad gist of what we had to cover in this topic related to the financial modeling creation from scratch and then using it for valuation purpose as well. So let's move on to the next topic. Let me take a pause here for 2 minutes for you to allow to open the next set of files that we are going to discuss. Now we're going to talk about the concept of mergers and acquisitions. So please make sure that you have the 5 Excel files available with you related to the mergers and acquisition modeling. So please make sure that you have the 5 Excel files related to M&A and please open that. So I'll just be here for 2 minutes and I'll give you 2 minutes to open those files and have it downloaded in case you don't have it readily available. And as always, I'm going to save all of these Excel files in the same Google Drive link after the class is over. So the class is going to get over close to 3 o'clock. So latest by 3:30, I'll be able to put the files that Google Drive link. So you can go to that link to download the solved version of these Excel files that we're discussing. Right? So please let me know in case you don't have any of those Excel files. Yes, Jan, I just saw your question. You're right. You could use that information. Now, Modron gives a lot of information on this website, which is typically used by many people across the globe for conducting valuation. So, yeah, Zian, I mentioned this point that you could use median, you could use simple average. So, obviously, if you use different average method, then the result is going to be different. So, I specifically mentioned this point over there that I would use a simple average if there are no outliers. But there is no problem if you would like to use median. Like in this sheet, if you notice, I've used median over there. So when you get the next point is to you need to please open that M&A file number 1. So there is this file called FAR01 M&A. Yeah, fine, fine. All right. I hope all of you have opened the M&A participant file number 1. Before I take you to the Excel file, I just want to take 2 minutes to walk you through the case study that we're going to talk about now, the next 3 hours. So, what we are going to do in this case study is basically whenever a mergers and acquisition deal happens, then what kind of analysis is done? What is the sequence in which we do the analysis? Obviously, the valuation is an important part. Financial modeling is equally important. But when it comes to M&A, there is an additional bit of analysis that we have to do, right? So what we are going to do here is that whenever an acquisition has to happen, then what level of analysis is typically conducted by the analyst, right? So there's this case wherein this company ABC has its IT consulting and outsourcing business in the US. And this company is planning to expand its business. And in the last few years, ABC has noted that it is not able to grow because of the competition. So, because there is too much of competition in the market, ABC felt a need to go for an acquisition to be able to expand its business. So as part of that business expansion plan, ABC is looking to acquire a company PQR, which is a big presence in the IT outsourcing sector with the main clientele from the US. So it's basically looking, the ABC is basically looking to acquire its competitor, PQR, right? So to move ahead, ABC management has asked you to evaluate the deal, and because of the size of PQR, which is PQR is pretty big. So because it is pretty big, so ABC has decided that it will go for a stock plus. All of these terms I'm going to talk about one by one as we move ahead. So we need to evaluate this deal, whether it is going to make sense or not, what level of synergy this deal will generate, and what is the merger plan, what kind of cash is required, what kind of stock we are giving to the target entity, and all that stuff, whether it is leading to accretion, dilution, all this we will discuss in the case study. All right. So please open the file number 1, and here I'll walk you through with questions related to this. Please open file number 1. Now there is this company ABC which is looking to acquire PQR. So ABC is called an acquirer company, and PQR is called a target company. The the way we are going to do the analysis over here is that this ABC, which is looking to acquire, has got a revenue of $7,634 million, while PQR, which is the target company, which is being acquired, that has a revenue of $9,161 million. So you see that a smaller company is looking to acquire a bigger company. And in fact, both the companies are quite big. $7.6 billion is also not a small number. But the perspective is that a company is acquiring, ABC is acquiring a company PQR, which is even bigger than itself. So that's exactly what we need to see over here, that how we do the analysis. So what I would like to do over here, first of all, we would need to see that what is the end objective of this entire analysis. The end objective is to see that if I do this deal, whether this deal is beneficial for the shareholders of ABC or not. If it is beneficial, then only I am going to proceed. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense for me to do this deal. So that is the overall perspective of this analysis that we are going to do out here. So the final objective is to find out whether the deal is beneficial to shareholders of ABC, and that we can work out by comparing the EPS of merged entity with EPS of ABC pre-merger. So if pre-merger, I'm having an EPS of $10 a share, and now after the merger, my EPS is $12 a share, which means that my EPS is gone up. So if the EPS increases, then deal is accretive, which means beneficial, and if EPS decreases, then the deal is dilutive in nature, or it leads to dilution. So dilution means that your EPS is going to go down and it is not beneficial for us. So if it is, whether it is leading to accretion or dilution, that's what we are trying to figure out from the EPS standpoint. Now you see the EPS before the deal is pretty simple, but how do you work out the EPS after the deal? EPS after the deal is driven by EPS at any point in time is equal to the net profit after tax divided by number of shares. Now pre-merger there is no problem, but after the merger I will have to see what is the net profit after tax after. And the net profit after tax of merged entity after the merger is nothing but a couple of additions. Number one, the net profit after tax of ABC pre-merger plus net profit after tax of PQR pre-merger plus any sort of synergy benefits from the merger that will increase your profit, and any kind of merger related cost that will reduce your net profit. That's how you work out the net profit of the merged entity. Now you see, these are the two components which are missing right now. I don't know what are the synergies from the merger, and I also don't know what are the merger specific costs. So the entire discussion is actually going to be focused on what are the synergies that we expect to generate and what is the merger related cost, right? So let's get started with the first part as to what is the synergy that we expect from this merger. All right. So please move to the synergy sheet, and here I've got the data called for ABC, PQR, and then there is this column which is basically indicating the total of the companies without the synergy, and this column indicates the total with the synergy, which is basically after the synergy has been captured. So let us park the data right now. I've got to pick the revenue, operating cost, depreciation, interest, and tax of ABC before merger. So it's already available with us in the input tab over here. I'm going to pull it in this sheet like this. You pick it from here in the F4, and you could do that for PQR as well over here on the right hand side. So the ABC revenue, operating expense, and all that stuff is given here. You could simply pull it from there and pull it across. Now, as a prerequisite, as I said before, you would definitely need the financial model for both ABC and PQR on a standalone basis. So the way we create the financial model and the process that we discussed, you would typically create the model on the same lines for both ABC and PQR, so that you have the detailed workings behind the values that you're picking here. So that will kind of give you an input that you're taking out here for the analysis purpose. To use that model to put across these important inputs out here, which is basically to begin with. So like in the current year, I've got this much that I'm expecting. In 2020, I'm expecting this is the revenue, operating expense, and all that stuff for both ABC and PQR. So taking a summation of these two together, I could expect this kind of P&L without the synergy. I mean, if I do a simple summation, this is what I could expect. Do a simple summation, this is what I could expect. We haven't really captured anything right now to account for synergy. I hope this makes sense. This is the plain summation right now. What happens usually is when you kind of go for a merger, then you have to account for some common factors. So what is the definition of synergy? Synergy is nothing but the benefit that you get from a merger. If you are going to go ahead for a merger, you would basically see that this merger might lead to increase in revenue, or it might lead to decrease in the operating cost or decrease in some other costs, which would definitely help you increase your profitability. That is what we typically expect. That's our expectation. Now, if it happens the other way, that because of the merger your profitability has gone down, then that means there is a dilution. But what we are precisely trying to figure out over here, we're trying to see that what benefit I expect out of this merger. So if these two companies were to merge together, what's the level of revenue that I will have after the merger is done? So in this case, you see that in the inputs tab, there is this data on the common factors. So I would like to invite your attention to the row number 17, or the section which is starting in row number 17, which is on the common factors. So if you notice, both ABC and PQR are catering to the same market, the US market in the IT domain, right? So what may have happened right now, that when you are doing business, when ABC is doing business, and when ABC is trying to create projections, it may have taken certain assumption that right now I'm serving these and these many clients, and next year I will be able to get additional business from this client, this business from the other client, and so on. So you might have taken, which would have been baked in to arrive at the revenue projections as well. But same logic, PQR would also have applied. PQR would also have seen or assumed that my revenue is going to go up because of the additional revenue that I would be able to generate from so and so customers. So what happens is that at the end of the day, both of these companies are catering to the same market and they are kind of competitors to each other. And there is a possibility that if one person or one entity is having a customer and the other entity is also trying to tap the same customer, then only one of them will be able to increase their revenue. So we notice that there is a 10% shared customer that PQR has got. So of the total revenue that PQR generates, 10% of that is basically coming from a shared customer, which means that after the merger is executed, there is a possibility that I would no longer be able to get it in my total because ABC has already taken that in its numbers. So if I also take it, it will lead to double counting. Let's say both of these are IT companies and they are catering to the US government defense project for the IT support. Then what will happen that after the merger is completed, obviously both of these companies cannot expect a growth in the same customer. So only one of them can grow. So there would be a shared customer level, which would basically lead to reduction in revenue. That is one part. But at the same time, there is also a possibility that there is some product that we are selling right now to, or which ABC is selling right now to its customers, which is not being sold to the customers of PQR as of now. There is this unique product which we have. So after the merger, there is a possibility that we are able to cross sell some existing products to the other customers of the company. So that leads to increase in revenue. So this synergy could mean anything. It could lead to after the merger, it could lead to reduction in revenue. It could lead to increase in revenue. Like over here, we have got this 10% cut that I'm going to apply. I would say that this minus 10% cut on PQR because of the shared customer, right? This is what I expect in terms of revenue from this company after the merger is executed. But as I said, if there's some sort of a cross-selling assumption, you could take that as well, which could mean that my revenue will go up by 5%. So ABC would say that its revenue would go up by 5%. QR's revenue would decline by 10%, but ABC's revenue will go up by 5% because of that cross-selling. All right. I see somebody is on unmute. Can I please request you to keep yourself on mute? Please, all of you, if you could put yourself on mute. Thank you. So that's on the revenue part. Now let's move on to the operating expenses. Now, usually the operating expenses tend to decline. The reason for this is that let's take this simple example. So there is a CEO in the first company, there is a CEO in the second company. So after the merger is completed, probably you don't need two CEOs. If you have a different department that you would like to, to be led by the other CEO, it's fine. Otherwise, you would definitely let go of the other person. Similarly, there is a common CFO in both there's going to be one single CFO in both the companies, unless and until you need a separate one in both to be able to manage the scale of business or scale of finances. And there could be other support function staff as well. Then you may have some offices which you would share after the merger is completed, which would lead to reduction in the facilities cost. All of that would mean that there would be a reduction in the operating cost. So let's say we've got same location branches, which would mean that 30% of the cost I'm going to reduce. 30% of the total cost I'm going to reduce, and hence my at an individual level the cost was looking like 4,500 here and 6,800 here, which would have reached 11,500, but it's only going to look like 93 and 9,400 after the merger because of the reduction in the operating cost. So usually in account of merger, your revenue tends to increase because of cross-selling or sometimes decrease as well. Like in this case, you see that case. And operating costs usually tends to decline because of the scale of business. So you may be able to vacate some properties which you have taken on lease as of today, which would help you save on the lease rent, or you would also be able to take out some of the people who you do not require after conversion. That's something that's going to lead to operating efficiencies. Apart from revenue and operating cost, there's quite a bit of possibility that there are other elements which will remain unchanged. Like you see this depreciation. So company A has got some assets on which depreciation is being computed. TQR also has some assets on which depreciation is being computed. So probably here you wouldn't have any impact, it will remain unchanged. And same is the case with interest, that if ABC has taken some loan, PQR has taken some loan, both of them are paying interest, so that they'll continue to pay the same level of interest unless they are going to take an additional loan, or they have got access to some cash with which they're able to repay the existing loan. That will mean the interest expense is going to undergo a change. But right now, if I tell you, I don't have any information about that. But as we move further in the third file, I would discuss about this point, that what is the amount of fresh loan that the company has to take to fund this particular transaction. That would mean the interest cost is definitely going to go up. But right now, we haven't gone to that level. So on a standalone basis, if I just pick, ABC has got some debt on which the interest is 976, PQR has got some debt on which the interest is 1464. So at a total level, the interest is going to be 2400. So that's what is given out. All right. So we've got all the operating expenses listed out here. We will be able to get the profit before tax, but I need to see what is the effective tax rate. So what is the effective tax rate? So effective tax rate is nothing but, if you would try to compute the net profit, what would that be? The PBT, for example, profit before tax is given as 100 and the tax is given as 20. That means the tax rate is equal to 20 by 100, which is nothing but 20%. So what I'm trying to do over here is that I have to figure out the effective tax rate, which is going to be equal to the tax figure in the numerator, and in the denominator I'm going to have the PBT, which is essentially revenue minus operating expense minus depreciation minus interest expense. All of that you will subtract here to be able to figure out the PBT, which is profit before tax, right? Revenue minus operating expense minus depreciation and interest, that gives you profit before tax. Take that in the denominator and work out what the effective tax rate is. And obviously after the merger, this rate, effective rate at an overall level, I could assume that it's going to remain the same. So it's 30% computed like this, which is tax amount divided by PBT. Similarly for the other one and the merged entity as well. And for the merged entity, even with synergies or without synergies, the rate is the same. So I've made it equal to H. So Venkat, if there is any difference in the depreciation method or something like that, that would come under the accounting realignment. So big changes in that particular case. So if you revisit those numbers and work out that the what you call as because of the depreciation method, the depreciation is going to go down or it's going to go up, because one company is using SLM, the other company is using written down value method. And when you align the policies in both the companies after merger, probably you go for one of that, which could lead to increase in depreciation or it could also lead to decrease in depreciation. All of that computation would definitely be needed, and that kind of an adjustment can be taken here. But till the time you keep these two entities separate in terms of the legal entity status, probably this would not undergo a change. But I'm not saying that you shouldn't change it. If you notice any other change similar to this, please change that and incorporate it accordingly in the combined. Right? So this is what we've got. Now I work out the net profit. In all of these cases, it's going to be revenue minus sum of all expenses including the tax. That gives you net profit after tax. This is 1135 million dollars for ABC, and just $100 million for PQR. So you notice that PQR is bigger as compared to ABC in terms of turnover. But when it comes to the net profit in absolute terms, it is actually smaller. It is generating lesser revenue, lesser net profit as compared to the level of revenue that it enjoys, which means that there is a clear-cut indication that the company is having some problem with the operating cost because the revenue is high but the net profit is low, which is clear-cut indication that the operating costs have not been managed well, right? So Sian, in that case, what will happen if there are, so if you notice, I have taken it equal to without synergy. So if both of these are having the same, if they're having, if ABC and PQ are in falling in the different tax bracket, so obviously the effective tax rate for the column H would be different. Like in this case, it is same as 30% because there is no change. But let us assume that this was not 43. But let me just put a number of 80 here. That would mean it would be different. This is just an example, right? Let's say instead of 486, this ABC had a tax of only 250. That would mean that it is into 15% bracket and this is into 30% bracket. So at an overall level, it's going to be 16.6, which I'm keeping constant with synergy as well. So this is what we need to consider while putting the figures here. Now, what we have seen out here that the tax figure out here is missing. So when you try to compute, yes, yeah. So when we're trying to compute it, the tax figure is missing. So we need to put the tax figure out here in this column, which is going to be equal to PBT multiplied by, so the tax is equal to, tax amount is equal to PBT into tax rate. This is how we compute the tax amount. So I'm going to take the PBT, which is revenue minus this, minus this, minus this. So I'm taking the operating revenue minus operating cost minus depreciation minus interest. That gives me PBT multiplied by tax rate given in the next row as 30%, which is 873 of tax amount. Why has this tax gone up? Because our operating costs are going down, because of which the PBT will increase and hence we would pay more tax over here. So if you would notice that with synergy, I'm expecting that my net profit is going to increase to $2,036 million. Does this make sense? So that completes the net profit data till this stage. But what you notice over here that without synergy, the company is expected to have a net profit of 1235, and with synergy, the company is expected to have a net profit of 2000 something. So any increase that you notice, which is basically 2036 minus 1235, this increase is nothing but driven by the synergies that we expect from this deal. So this deal is expected to provide a synergy benefit of close to about $800 million. All right. So this deal expects to create a synergy of roughly about $800 million. So Zian, what we are doing here, I'm just trying to compare that if there was no synergy, then this company would have simply, this combined entity would have simply been able to create a total net profit or generate a total net profit of 1235. But because we expect some sort of synergy in terms of reduced cost, in terms of higher profitability, that means our profit is going to go up to 2000. So just because of the synergy component, my net profit is expected to go up by $800 million. And that's what we categorize that as synergy benefit post tax, right? So what do we do next? The point is that we are working on this for the first projection year, which is year number one, or you could say the current year, right? This is basically the current year, which I'm using as a basis, and I'm assuming that the synergies would definitely come from the next year onwards. So this delta that you see here is applicable for the first projection year, right? So I'm using the current year as a basis for it, assuming that the same thing applies to the next year as well, but the synergy is going to go up. Synergy is going to lead to increase in profit, which is making the synergy benefit equal to $800 million for the first year. But definitely, this keeps on increasing year on year. So what do we do next? We have to basically see that what increase we expect in percentage terms on year basis. Practically, you could create a financial model for it. There would be a proper team who would sit with the management, work out the strategy, chart it out, how we are going to execute it on the ground, and then see the year delta. But here I don't have those details. So what I can do here, I can simply take a percentage increase out here, because if I'm assuming my business to go up by 20%, that could be taken here. So I'm going to see that what is the growth rate expected in the next 5 years. So it's given in the assumptions tab. You notice the growth rate for ABC and PQR is given as 20 and 25%, right? This is given as 20 and 25%, while the overall entity, the merged entity, is expected to witness a growth rate of at an overall level. So going forward, if you notice that the going forward, I would use this 20% as a basis to increase my synergy. So this will become a basis for us to work out the year-on-year synergy benefit. The first year I expect 802, but definitely next year I expect it to increase by 20%, which is based on this assumption. Or what you could do, as I said before, create a proper financial model for ABC and PQR, which we typically do, and use that as a basis to work out the delta in the respective years, which would come and sit as part of the synergy benefit. But as I said, in this particular case, I'm trying to explain you what you need to do in terms of arriving at the final accretion or dilution result. So don't just be carried away with this concept that why is it just 20%. Practically, as I said, if you were to do it and you have the detailed financial model available with you for both ABC and PQR, that model will serve as a basis for you to arrive at these figures. So here it is more like a high level computation, because the purpose is not to discuss the concept of financial modeling, which you've already done before. So here I would just want to tell you that I need this synergy. That's it. All right. Any questions? Let me know. Yeah, please, Venkat, go on.
So,
Please go on with the question. So, Venkat, I cannot hear you.
hey, am I audible now?
Yes, you are audible now.
Sir, when you are saying this, maybe it's a weird question. This, when we are saying the merger and acquisition, right, especially in this synergies, are we not considering the merger and acquisition charges also? The
We
expenses
are,
also.
we are, definitely we are. And if I show you, this is what I had mentioned here, that we need to capture the synergies from merchant and also the merger related cost. All the
Correct.
merger related charges, because they're going to hire an investment banker who would support you. So there would be a professional who
Correct.
would support you. He would be charging something. Apart from that, there could be some other merger specific costs. You may be raising some fresh debt, which means additional interest expense. All of that stuff we will cover in the merger cost, and that would eventually reduce your net profit. So I haven't captured it as of now, but as we move ahead in this file, you would see that that also is going to get captured. That is
Sure,
pretty
sir.
much important, right? And there's another question which has been asked, that why only 5 years? See, the thing is that 3 years should be okay, but there's no thumb rule for it that it has to be exactly five. Usually we can make good projections for the next 3 years because we have a line of sight for it. But what happens beyond the third year, what we are going to do 4 years down the line, 5 years down the line is probably pretty difficult. But usually 3 to 5 years is a standard period for which the analysis is done. Okay, any other questions? Um, Working capital changes will have no impact. So, Riddhi, okay, can you hear me? I see a couple of messages that I'm disconnected. So I think then there is some issue in a couple of, okay, fine, Abhinav, fair enough. So, I was talking about working capital changes. So, working capital changes would also be impacted. See, the thing is, when you create a financial model, you create entire P&L, balance sheet, and cash flow, and then you combine it. But what are we trying to do in this model right now? The purpose of doing this mergers and acquisition analysis is to be able to see whether the deal is accretive or dilutive from the EPS standpoint. I'm only focusing upon EPS right now, which comes from PL. So that is why this working capital component is not going to make a difference to the EPS figure over here. So that's why really I'm not talking about working capital changes right now, because the intent over here is to look at the net profit and hence the EPS. That's why this working capital is out of discussion, right? So if we have models ready and when we do deal analysis, only P&L is used. See, if it is only the point related to the accretion dilution related to EPS, then yes, only P&L is relevant. But does it mean that you don't have to worry about the But does it mean that you don't have to worry about the balance sheet components? Probably not. You do need to refer to them as well. But most importantly, EPS is relevant because that decides whether the deal is accretive or dilutive. Right? All right. So that completes the first file. Let's move on. Please open the file number 2 and there we'll proceed ahead to see that what level of pricing we are going to do for this particular deal. So please open file number 2. File number 2. So Prachi, the terminal period and all that stuff is basically related to the valuation concept. As I said, the purpose of M&A analysis right now that I'm discussing is to be able to see whether the deal is profitable or not. And that I'm trying to see with respect to the next couple of years, maybe 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Obviously, the terminal period will come into picture when you do the valuation. That will be relevant. But right now, as I said, we need to look at the end result. The end result is basically to see whether the deal is accretive or dilutive. That's how we are trying to work it out. Okay. Now let's move ahead. What are we trying to do? I'm trying to see that what is the share price of both ABC and PQR. So I go back to the inputs tab. You would notice that all of these data points are included in the input tab. Let me just increase the zoom. Right. So the closing price of both ABC and PQR is given here. That ABC is being traded at 419 and PQR is trading at 99. And what is the number of equity shares that we have got in both the companies? So I've got these many shares. You see that 100 million shares are outstanding in ABC and 150 million shares are outstanding in PQR. This is basically the basic outstanding shares in the company as of now. But what happens is, that each and every company usually would be having some sort of potential shareholders as well, which could mean that there are some employee stock options which have been given, or some other options which have been given to the option holder who has a right to claim or to buy shares from the company at a certain strike price. So what happens usually is that if ABC is trying to analyze the deal and say that I am going to buy the shares of PQR, then it would buy the shares not only from the current shareholders, but also from the potential shareholders. So now what we have to do, that in row number 4, what you see as 100 million, 150 million, this is basically the current shareholders. But what gets captured in option, what is the strike price and all that stuff, we'll talk about that in detail now, right? So Riddhi, your point will be answered very shortly. So let me take an example. Let's say there is this company PQR which has issued options to various employees. So there is this employee A, employee B, and employee C. So there are three employees to whom the options have been given. So I've given these many options. So options are basically the employee are given to employees under the employee stock option plan, which the company might have. So say I've given 100 options to this employee, 50 options to this, and 200 options to this. In total, if you see, the company has given 350 options, but there is a strike price. So what is the strike price? The strike price means that today, if I have to buy, I am an employee A and I have to buy the shares of this company, what is the price that I have to pay? Let's say I have to pay 80. And I would straight away ask that what's the market price? Or the price at which the deal is going to happen. Let's say it is 100. Right. So let's say the deal price or the market price is 100. And as an employee of this company, I have a right to buy the shares at a price of 80. Now the question is that would I buy at 80? Definitely yes, because I can sell it off in the market at 100. That's the price. So why would I not buy it? So strike price is basically the price at which I can get my options executed, which means that 80 rupees is the price at which I will be buying the shares of the company if I exercise this option. Let's say this employee B has got, yes, really this is determined under the ESOP scheme. The time when it is given to the employees, this is decided. So that's how you basically work it out. Yes, this is the exercise price, one and the same, right? Now, say this employee B has been given all of these options free of cost at a price of 0. Now, would B exercise it? Yes, he would definitely exercise it because he's going to get it for free. So why would he have to, what reason would he give for not exercising it if he can get everything for free? So he would definitely exercise that. And let's say this employee C who needs to pay 120 to be able to buy the share. So would he exercise? Probably not. To pay, we'll have to pay 120 for buying the shares while the share is worth only 100 in the market. So it doesn't make sense for employee C to buy the shares. So he wouldn't do anything. So the question is that whether exercised, yes, to yes, C, no. So what is the benefit percentage to all of these employees? The benefit percentage to employee C is basically 20 rupees on a base of 100 or something base of 80. For B, it is 100% benefit. For C, there is no benefit at all. If I have to work out the benefit, let's look at it this way. That I'll come to the benefit percentage later. But what is this benefit? The benefit is that C, if he has to buy the shares, how many shares is he going to get for free? That's what indicates the benefit. Because the amount paid by employee is going to be 100 options multiplied by 80. That's the amount which I'm going to pay. So I'm going to pay 8,000 rupees out here and but over here, if I take this 24,000, I wouldn't because I'm not going to buy it at all. So I wouldn't put this formula. So what I'm going to say that if this strike price is less than the market price that I have, then only I'm going to pay this amount. Otherwise, I'm not going to pay any amount at all. Right? So if 80 rupees is the strike price or the exercise price at which I can buy the shares, only then I'm going to buy it. And what is the price I pay? What is the amount I pay? I pay 80 rupees a share multiplied by 100 options indicating the shares. So I'm going to pay 8,000 rupees for buying 100 shares of a company. So what is the number of shares equivalent? Number of equivalent shares that is going to, we should ideally get. It is this divided by 100. If this person, this employee, goes in the market and utilizes 8,000 rupees, he would be able to buy 80 shares, right? He would be able to buy 80 shares using the same amount. But how many shares is he going to get from the company? He's going to get 100 shares from the company. So what is the benefit? Or you say that additional number of shares as benefit. That is 100 minus 80. That is what he's going to get as a benefit, 20 shares. And for B, it is the entire 50 shares. But for C, I'm not going to compute it at all. So the perspective that I'm trying to put over here is that if you see what I'm discussing here, I'm just trying to say that everybody would exercise the options if the options offer them a benefit. If there is no benefit, then employee wouldn't exercise that option. So in reality, the number of options is like 350. But against 350 options that the company has given, the employees are going to get a benefit only to the extent of 70 shares. So for a company, what is the cost? Because company is also going to get 8,000 rupees. So the cost is just for those 70 shares. And this basically is the real number that even the acquirer has to focus upon. Because the amount that I recover from A, I'm not liable for it. I am liable, like look at employee A. Employee A is paying me 8,000 rupees. And I have to pay him, give him 100 shares. But he's already paying me 8,000. So I'm going to give him a benefit of only 20 shares. Because 80 shares will be given to him because he's paying for that. But 20 shares are given to him free of cost. So the cost of 100 shares is split between company and the employee. And hence, when you look at the number of options, it is not 350 that we have to capture, but just a 70, which needs to be taken over here, right? So what we do here, let me just do let me repeat that. Let me put it this way, that options exercise, that we make the things clear. So Meher, I'm going to repeat it again for you. So please have a look at this. Options exercise. So how many options could employee A be exercising? I will put a logic to say that if the strike price at which the employee can buy is less than the market price, then I'm going to exercise all the options that I hold. Otherwise, I'm not going to exercise any option at all. So the logic is that employee A will exercise all 100 options, employee B will exercise all 50 options, and employee C will exercise 0 options because there is no benefit that he gets. Right? Let me delete that for right now. So what is the amount that A is going to pay? The amount that A is going to pay is 80 rupees on 100 options. So he will pay 8,000 rupees, he will pay 0 rupees, and obviously he will pay 0 rupees. But the way it works is that if this employee A does not give 8,000 rupees to the company and goes in the market and tries to buy the shares, what price would he buy it at? 100? So he would be able to buy 80 shares from the market. So the company will say that don't give me 8,000 rupees because that's your own money. You can go to the market and buy these many shares. But what is the cost that I'm going to incur? I'm going to incur as a company only a cost towards 20 shares. And that's what this indicates. That's what this indicates, that this is going to be equivalent to 70 shares. So the statement that I'm trying to put over here is that 350 options are equivalent to only 70 shares, which means that when I try to work out the dilution or the amount that I need to pay as a company, it is only towards 70 shares because these 200 options are like useless for me. Nobody is going to exercise it, so there is no cost attached to it. There is no benefit to the employee, so hence there is no cost to the company. But there is a cost to the company for employee B because the entire 50 is the cost. For employee A, the cost to the company is just 20. So in total, the cost to the company is 70 shares, and that's what I'm trying to put out. Right? Saurabh, you have a question related to OCPS, which is, I believe, optionally convertible preference shares. So if it is optionally convertible under the accounting standards, it is mentioned how we do the treatment. So what we do over there is if it is compulsory convertible, then it is pretty clear that it is going to get converted and I would have to issue the shares. But if it is optionally convertible, then over there we look at the premium. Now, see, the point is as a preference shareholder, if the dividend on that preference share is just is let's say 10%. Now, this is something which is good enough for a preference share. The market rate is also close to 10%. So if I'm getting 10% dividend on the preference shares, then I'm good with it. But you notice that the dividend is just about 1%. Then there is a different logic for it. And if it is optionally convertible, I don't know whether it is going to be converted or not. So over there, finding out the dilution impact is difficult. Whether it is going to be converted or not, I don't know. So finding out the dilution impact becomes difficult for us. So as a valuer, what we could do, obviously there is a bit of assumption out here. There is no perfect answer for it. But what I could do out here, that if it is optionally convertible, I would rather ignore the dilution and take it as a normal debt. Because if it is not going to get converted, then I would say that this is the amount of preference shares that I've issued. I'm going to pay exactly the same amount that is there in the books as of now. I would take that as a cost, similar to what we typically do for a debt company. But if it is compulsory convertible preference shares (CCP), then it depends whether it is on whether the conversion ratio is fixed. If that is fixed, that will help you to figure out the number of shares. If it is not fixed, we try to look at the dividend which is being offered, and then we work out that what is the real benefit which is being given to them, and the delta helps you to figure out the corresponding number of shares. So the way it works is that there is this dilution which you need to work out to be able to see what is the liability component, what is the equity component. And under the Indian accounting standards, there is this concept of deemed equity, which comes into picture. So this concept is actually applicable out, right? Otherwise, if you don't know what's going to be the dilution impact, we can take it as is as a liability. But if you see 1% CCPS or 0.1% CCPS, that clearly is an indication that it is going to definitely get converted. So I would rather take it as equity instead of taking it as the liability component of the preference shares. Right? So what do we do here? The way to compute it is that we can straight away, I've put a formula here that we can straight away figure out that the number of options can be taken like 100 multiply by 1 minus strike price divided by market price. That gives you the same number over here. So if I'm going to put this formula logic here, a direct formula, it is going to be equal to the number of options exercised into 1 minus strike price divided by market price. You would take it and then same result. Right? So what happens is whenever the companies would declare its results in the annual report, you'll be able to see that the total number of options given are so and so, but the weighted average strike price is X and the market price is Y. So you use this formula to be able to work out the equivalent number of shares for the purpose of computing diluted equity. Right? And there's this question that if the company is not listed, how do you work out the price? In that case, you use the valuation, or if the company is under, the company is being acquired, you have a deal price at which it is being acquired. So that becomes the basis for you to work out the equivalent number of shares. All right. So let's come back and use this logic over here. Yes, Prachi, you're right. So it's basically the number of options that we've got. You would pick it from inputs, 10.6 million options into 1 minus strike price divided by share price. Number of options into 1 minus strike price divided by market price. You see that in F15 and F16, it's got the requisite data points, and in F22, it's got the closing price. So this is how we can work out the options rollover, or which is equivalent number of shares for the option. So the diluted equity, or basically the diluted number of shares, including this option, is going to be 104 and 154.36, right? So please complete this stage before we move ahead. Any doubts, questions to this stage, please let me know. The formulae are already included on the left-hand side for all the rows that we have covered. Any questions, please let me know, otherwise we can move on. All right, I assume there are no further questions, so let's move ahead. Yes, Abhijit, that's the cost to the company. That's why we are taking this as additional equity shares. Now, what we have to do is the next step is that PQR is being acquired. PQR is the target company, right? So I have to see that what price I pay for it. Usually what happens is you might have noticed for a company which is listed at a price and the share price in the stock market is say 100 rupees. The moment the acquisition is announced, you tend to see that the price goes up, because the intention is that whenever the acquisition is going to happen, it will be done at a price which is slightly more than the market price. So the companies should be ready to pay a price which is a little more than the prevailing market price. So you would notice that there is going to be a premium being paid on the market price. That premium is technically termed as the deal premium. So we would pay some sort of a deal premium whenever a deal is executed, which is nothing but market price plus deal premium. So how that deal premium works, it could be a certain percentage of the market price. If the market price is say 100 and I'm going to pay 20% premium on it, it is nothing but 100 plus 20% of 100, which is essentially 1 plus 20% of it. So when you take 100 plus 20% of 100, that gives you 120, which is nothing but 100 into 1 plus 20% premium. So this logic I'm going to use here, and I'm trying to build some scenarios. So there are some deal premium scenarios that I'm trying to build. So definitely you would do DCF valuation and all that stuff. When you sit on the negotiation table, you would finalize the price. But here we're trying to build some sort of a scenario related to the deal premium, that okay, the DCF value might have been 120 or 130. But let me just do some analysis that what if I pay 0% premium? What if I pay 10% premium? What if I pay 20%, 30%, 40 or 50% premium? I'm just trying to see the impact of all of these deal premium scenarios on the accretion and value. What is the cost to the company? What is the amount that we have to arrange? What is the amount of loan that I'm going to take if I keep on increasing the deal premium? Logically speaking, the higher the deal premium, the more the cost is, because they're going to pay a higher price for the same shares. But let us just see what it is. So it is going to be the base closing price fixed at multiply by 1 plus deal premium, which you can take on the right hand side to be able to see the final result. So it is equal to G3 into 1 plus F8, which is basically trying to figure out the base share price that is there multiplied by 1 plus deal premium. So if it is 0% deal premium, means that you execute the deal at the market price of $99. If it is 10% premium, then it means that you execute the deal at $109 a share. 20%, 30, 40, 50. This is what we have assumed to be able to see that what is the amount that we actually pay if we execute the deal at a certain price. So what it means that if I pay $99 per share, how many shares am I going to acquire? 54. If I am going to pay $99 a share and I'm going to acquire 104 million shares, that means I'm going to pay this much of price. This is going to be my total purchase consideration as an acquirer. If I have to buy this company today, then execute the deal at 0% real premium means I have to shell out $15,281 million for buying the shares from people. Does that make sense? Right? So what does it translate to in terms of enterprise value? You would know now that enterprise value is essentially your equity value plus debt minus cash. So what we have done, we have first figured out the purchase consideration. Now, just to repeat it one more time, what we are trying to do in this sheet, we're trying to build various scenarios. One option is simple, that you assume that I'm going to execute the deal at $120 per share. To take that and proceed further with the workings. But I am trying to build some scenarios, that what if the deal is executed at 99? What if the deal is executed at 109? What if the deal is executed at 149? And so on, so forth. Just to be able to see that when I am sitting on the negotiation table, I know that these numbers are there in my mind and this is the corresponding impact of these values. So rather than just trying to work out the entire data on the basis of one single price, we try to see the impact of various premiums and the result in all of those scenarios. So the purchase consideration the is essentially the number of shares that I'm going to buy multiply by the price that I'm going to pay. So that's what I have computed in the row number 10. And this gives me the equity value of that company, on the top of which if I add the debt of PQR, which is given out here in the input sheet somewhere out here in the cell G10, please fix that, minus cash 1739, please fix this as well. When you do this, what's going to happen that it's going to give you the enterprise value. Why I'm trying to compute enterprise value is that the value that you got in the purchase consideration is basically called equity value. So as you would typically notice that whenever the deals are announced in the press release, any document or whatever information is shared by the company, they talk about the concept of enterprise value and the deal multiples are usually connected to enterprise value. Whenever we hear the term EV, it is basically related to the enterprise value. So that's why I'm also trying to work out the enterprise value over here, which is essentially the purchase consideration plus debt minus cash. Riddhi, I think you got the answer. That is not going to be deducted. That is going to be added. And Zayan, the round off the dilute. Why would you want to round it off? It's basically 104.21 million shares. So if you would like to round off, do it at the sixth decimal place. Yeah, no problem. That's fine. So this gives you the number of. This gives you the final number at which the deal is computed. If the premium is 0, 10, 20, 30, 40. Why do we reduce cash? See, this concept we discussed in the DCF valuation also, that if I'm going to buy this company, I'm going to buy this company as a whole. So who I have to pay? There are two stakeholders. One, debt. Two, equity. So equity, I'm going to pay 15,000. Debt, I'm going to pay whatever is there in the books as of now, which is basically 3,500. But today, if I buy this company has already got 1,700 cash, so that can be used to pay the debt to that extent. So on a net basis, the debt in this company is only 1,850. So when I buy it, I buy the company as a whole because the shareholders own the shares. They don't have a claim on the company's assets directly. So if the company has got a cash of 1739, this is the cash of the company, not the cash of the shareholders. So basically what happens is you basically reduce it from debt while working out the net debt component. I see there is another point that why cash cannot be added out here. So when you basically take the equity value, you could take the cash over there as well. But here, the term that I've used is more like a purchase consideration, which is the amount that I have to pay to the equity shareholders for the shares that they hold. So that's why I'm not taking cash over here. All right. While taking EV, why did I add cash? I don't know what you mean by this. I was reducing the net debt over there as well. Over there, what had happened, I had got the enterprise value and I was reducing the net debt to arrive at equity value. So if you look at this formula, I was reducing the net debt. So what is this net debt? If you open the bracket, this is debt minus cash. What happens is if you still open the bracket, it's going to be enterprise value minus debt plus cash equal to equity value. This is what we did in the DCF sheet, right? And that's exactly what we are doing here. But now we have the equity value to begin with. So I'm adding the debt component and subtracting the cash. All right. I hope this helps. Any further questions? Yeah, look at it this way. If it is net debt, it's basically already debt minus cash. So when you take something to the other side, the signs get reversed. All right, fair enough. Let's move ahead. Now, what do I need to do over here? I have to look at certain deal ratios or deal multiples. So let us look at some deal multiples. I'll come to the other part, which is over here a little later. Let's first look at the deal multiples. Like in the relative valuation sheet, you remember that I had spoken about the EV to sales multiple, EV EBITDA multiple, price to earning multiple. Let us compute those multiples out here. So if it is EV to sales, what it is basically F11 divided by sales of this company. Sales of this company is 9161. So it's 1.87 times. EV to sales is this. If I compute EV to EBITDA, that is row number 11 EV divided by EBITDA. EBITDA is not given straight away out here, so I'm going to take the total revenue minus total operating expense. That gives you EBITDA. Revenue minus operating expense. And why is it increasing as we go on the right hand side? Because on the right hand side, we've got scenarios that you pay higher premium, you pay higher price, which means that the deal value is on the higher side. Obviously, the EV increases on the right hand side. So what it means is that in this case, the deal multiple EV to sale is going to be between 1.8 to 2.7. So whatever final price we are going to take in this, let's say we execute the deal at 20% premium, just taking an example, then in that case, my deal multiples would include EV to sales of 2.2 times and EV 0.81. And on the same lines, if you have to work out the PE, to recollect what we did in the PE, in the PE, I spoke about this before, that it is equal to, it can be computed in two different ways, that it is equal to the equity value divided by the EPS, sorry, net profit after tax. Or you could take the PE as share price divided by EPS, right? Share price divided by EPS. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to compute the PE by using any of these concepts. So, like I haven't computed the EPS as of now, so I'm going to use the first one, which is equity value divided by, which is there in row number 10, this divided by net profit after tax, which we kind of computed over here. In this energy tab, I had computed that this is $100 million. I'm going to use that. That gives me PE multiple, price to earnings multiple. Does this make sense? Price to earnings is basically equity value. So, see if you see that this is, we are not taking enterprise value here. So price is basically the share price, which is related to the equity value. Okay, fair enough. And the last ratio over here is basically the swap ratio, the exchange ratio. This is something that you might have heard before as well, that whenever the uh, any deal is executed, there is more like a swap ratio. So you pick the deal of any two companies wherein one company was acquired by another company, you would always notice this term is used. Somebody would like to call it a swap ratio, somebody else could call it as an exchange ratio and all that stuff. What it means is that if this deal is executed, ABC share price is 415, PQR's share price is 99 per share. And if I buy the shares from PQR and give the shares of ABC, how many shares of ABC am I going to give? So PQR's share is worth 99. ABC share is 100. So for each share that you hold in PQR, you are going to get 0.25 shares of ABC approximately, which is nothing but equal to the price at which the deal is executed divided by the ABC share price, which is going to give you 0.4 over here, 0.24 over here, which is roughly about 0.25, right? Which is what I mentioned before, that it is $99 per share of PQR divided by $415 per share of ABC. Here we're trying to compare the valuation, the price of both the companies. So if price of PQR is 100 and the price of ABC is 400, then each share of ABC, which is 400, is equal to 4 shares of PQR. So in the other words, one share of PQR is equal to 0.25 shares of ABC. The interpretation of 0.24 is that 0.24 indicates that 0.24 shares of ABC, or you could say each share of PQR is worth 0.25 shares of ABC. This is what it means, that 0.24 times here indicates that each share of PQR is worth 0.24 shares of ABC. Now, do I actually give them these many shares? That's a separate point that I'm going to talk about very shortly. But this is what it means, that if the deal happens all in the stock, that you take shares of PQR and give them shares of ABC, then this is what is going to happen, that you would get only 2.24 shares of ABC for each share that you hold in PQR. So if today I'm holding 100 shares of PQR, then as account of this acquisition, I'm going to get 24 shares of AB. This is what it indicates. So we technically use a term called exchange ratio or a swap ratio. All right. So let's take a break for 20 minutes for the lunch, and once we are back, we'll proceed further with this sheet wherein I would talk about the remaining 3 lines which are here and how we are going to make the payment, how we are going to settle it, whether it is going to be the stock payment or the cash payment, and what it means. I will speak about that in detail after that. All right. So let's meet in another 20 minutes, around 1:30. Thank you. This is Amari, and sorry for being a little late. Before I proceed further, let me just pick any questions that you've got till this stage. Any questions or doubts till this stage? Okay, so Vijit, your question is that why we take the valuation of the target company to ascertain the purchase consideration. So the thing is that what are we trying to buy? We're trying to buy the shares of PQR, which is our target company, right? Now, that particular company is having shareholders to whom we have to make the payment. So we are trying to find out what is the amount that we have to pay to the shareholders of those companies. So that is why I'm taking the valuation of that particular company to be able to work out the amount of purchase consideration. That's why we are doing it for PQR. Can we not take the intrinsic value for this? So what is this? What is the definition of this intrinsic value? This intrinsic value is basically the fair value of that particular company, right? And that's exactly what we are doing. We're just trying to say that if the fair value is, let's say, 100, but I'm going to execute the deal at, let's say, 190, then if I do the deal at 119, what is the amount of purchase consideration that I will end up paying. So that's why we are just building some scenarios around it. That if I pay 99, this is the amount of purchase consideration. If I pay 129, this is the purchase consideration. If I pay 149, then this is the purchase consideration. That's what we are doing. So yeah, Vichi, that's right. We can do the DCF and we can take that value and let us assume that the DCF value comes to 120. Let's assume the DCF value of PQR is 120. Now you can do the deal at 120. But what is the purpose of creating all of this scenario data? Because if the other party, let's say when you are sitting on the negotiation table and the other party is demanding 140, then are you willing to pay 20 rupees extra on the top of 120 DCF value? If I execute the deal at 140, what impact will it have on the final EPS? Is it going to lead to accretion or lead to dilution? That is precisely what we are doing, right? So that is why I've taken a lot of prices here, which could also include the DCF price. And you can build those scenarios because only one of these scenarios is going to be finalized. I would do the deal at 110 or 20 or 25 or 30 or 35. Only one price is going to be finalized. So here I'm just trying to see that against all of those prices, what is going to be the corresponding purchase consideration and what amount I will have to shell out in all of those cases. No matter my DCF value could be 120, still I am executing the deal at 130 or 140 for that matter. Because I believe that I will be able to generate good amount of synergies from it, which will give me benefit in the years to come. Does that make sense? And if the DCF value is less than market price, then now think about it. If the DCF value is 80 rupees and you're trying to offer 80 rupees for a company's share, which is currently being traded at 99, nobody would like to actually sell off this. So the purpose is basically to buy the shares, and if they don't sell at 80, you wouldn't be able to execute the deal. So your DCA value could be 80 rupees, it could be 70 rupees. But if the market price is 99 and you have to convince the other party that I'm going to buy the shares only at a price which is less than this, then maybe nobody would agree to it, because they would say that if I go to the stock market and I try to sell it off, I can easily do it. But why would I sell the same shares at 80 rupees to you? So obviously that logic comes into picture. So usually what happens is in these cases, if the other party says that no, I'm going to pay only 80 and the person does not change, the ABC does not change the price. And then eventually you see over a period of time that PQR shareholders are quite interested to sell off their shares because of certain reasons. There could be a possibility that in the stock market the shares are not frequently traded, and now they're getting an exit at a price whatever is being offered. So what may happen that eventually the share price could also witness a decline, right? So this is true. In fact, if you notice that whenever a buyback offer is announced, you must have seen it in the market that sometime back, like I was holding shares of Balrampur Chini, for which I think the buyback was announced just last month in July, if I'm not mistaken, or first week of August. So what happened if the current market price was close to 120, 130 rupees, and the buyback happened at a price of I think 170 rupees, close to that. So what happens is if the company is going to do a buyback at a price which is lower than market price, nobody would like to tender the shares. So if you have to buy shares from the existing shareholder, you have to offer them a price which is definitely more than the market price. Otherwise, nobody will do. Right? So let us move ahead. Now, what I want to do, these are different scenarios. So look at one of these scenarios. Let's say if the purchase consideration is going to be this 15281. If this is the purchase consideration, the total purchase consideration is equal to 15281. How do we make the payment? The payment mode can be A, cash, B, it can be stock. Stock means that you give shares of ABC against the shares of PQR. That's what the stock means. And cash means you give cash for buying shares. So you give cash for buying shares of PQR. Now, what is the plus and minus of both of these options? So if you go for a payment mode, which is cash, then you need, so what are the plus points and the minus points? So the minus point is that if you need to give cash, you have to basically arrange for money and probably raise debt as well. So it increases your fixed cost in terms of interest. So you have to raise debt in case you need cash. Obviously, you need to raise debt. Like look at this. So purchase consideration is $15,281 million, $15 billion, right? Now you do not have $15 billion in the cash as of now in your pocket. So you're going to definitely raise a new loan, which would mean huge amount of leverage. That's a negative point. But the plus point is that you pay to the shareholders of PQR and you get them out of the business. Meaning that you will own, the ABC will own the overall business after this merger. And PQR shareholders have already been paid in cash and they are out of the picture. So there is no dilution in the shareholding. There is no dilution in shareholding. There is no dilution in the shareholding. What it means is that you effectively retain 100% control of the company. The way if I was having, let's say, 20% control of ABC before the merger, after the merger also, my control will be 20%. So there is no dilution in the shareholding because you continue to hold the shares in the merged entity in the same proportion. But if you are going to give the shares against the shares of PQR as a mode of settling the payment, like each share of PQR is 99 and you're giving them shares worth rupees 400, then you give shares of ABC, which means that you give them more shares, which means that you share the, or you give them some sort of a control as well. So there is a dilution in shareholding, which means that you give them some stake in the merged entity. So you lose on that control. So earlier you were having 100% control of ABC, and now probably you would have only 70% or 60% control of it. So you give some shareholding to the shareholders of PQR. But the plus point is no cash is needed, and hence no loan, no fixed costs. Without having any money in the pocket, you could still go ahead and do the deal. So what this company is doing, this company has seen that $15 billion is a pretty big amount. So it is not looking to go for 100% cash deal. But at the same time, it also doesn't want to give good amount of control to the PQR shareholders. So it is going for a combination. So in the market, the companies, the acquired companies will decide which particular mode to go or a combination of that, because you could go for 100% cash if you're okay to raise debt or you have got good money in the good cash in your pocket, or you could go for 100% stock in case you don't want to spend any cash and you don't want to raise any new loan. So it's more of a personal choice that the company will have to make, right? Like in this example, if you notice in the inputs tab, it is given that we are going for a cash component of 60%. So cash to the total is going to be 60%, which means that 60% payment in cash and the balance 40% in stock, right? 60% in cash, 40% in stock. So what we have to do, let's go back to the merger plan. Out of the total 15,281, 40% I'm going to pay in stock. This is the amount, 40%. I'm going to pay it in stock. And how do I pay it? I give them shares worth $415 each, which means that I'm going to give them these many shares. 15 million shares I'm going to give them. That's the payment in the form of stock. So what we are going to do here, we're going to see that the number of stocks of ABC that I'm going to be issuing to the shareholders of PQR would be equal to the purchase consideration multiplied by 40%. Now I have the 60% input in the input tab. So 40% is nothing but 1 minus 60%. So take this 1 minus 60% from here, divided by what is the price? 415. These many shares I'm going to issue. Look at this. So these many shares I am going to issue to the shareholders of PQR. So out of $15 billion, 40% of this, which is roughly about 6 billion, would be settled in the form of $415 worth of shares. So I'm going to eventually give them 14.73 million shares of my own company to the shareholders of PQR, which means that after the merger is completed, I originally had 104 million shares, plus on the top of it, I would have these many shares. So in total, after the merger, I'm going to have 118.94 million shares in the company, in the merged entity, right? Basically, fix this and then take. All right. So here, the intent is to figure out the number of shares that I'm going to issue. And as you notice, if I give them a higher premium, that means that the cost is going to be more for ABC, and hence we would have to issue more and more number of shares as we go on the right hand side. So let's take this point back just for sake of clarity. $15 billion is the overall purchase consideration. Multiply by 40% is the amount that I'm going to settle in the form of stock minus cash, divided by the share price of ABC, which is $415 per share, which will give you the total number of shares of ABC to be issued. Right? Or in other words, if you see what's the kind of shareholding that I'm going to offer them in the merged entity, I'm going to offer them 14 million shares on a total base of 118, which means roughly about 12% stake. So PQR is going to have 12% stake in the company after the merger is complete. So ABC, which earlier had 100% control, they will release 12.38% control in favor of PQR, and they will own 87.62% stake in the company after this merger is complete. All right. So take a minute to complete this, and we're done with this sheet. And after we are done, after this, we'll proceed to the next part, which is the cash component. And cash component is very interesting because there we need to figure out the amount of cash that I need, the amount of loan that I have to take. That's exactly what we are going to discuss in the next sheet. So take 2 minutes, finish it off, and let me know in case you have any questions before I move on to the next.